Welcome to the San Gorgonio Chapter Trail Talk series, which happens on the third Wednesday of every month at 7 p.m. through Zoom. My name is John St. Clair, and I am your Zoom host. And I want to go over a couple of ground rules before we get started. The first thing is everybody but the speaker and myself and the co-host should be muted. So if you haven't muted yourself, and I see a couple people that haven't muted themselves, please do so now. Or if you don't know how to do that, I can do it to you. And if you have any questions while the speaker is giving his talk, what we would like you to do is to write it in the chat section. Now, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a little talking bubble icon. And if you click in that, it opens up a little screen and you can type your question in there. And then either I or Carla or Julianne, if she joins later, will relay those questions to Walt, our speaker. And that way you won't forget what your question is, but you also won't interrupt the speaker when he's in the middle of doing something. So all questions go in the chat section. And then when the presentation is all over, you can unmute yourself and ask or say anything you want. But until that happens, we want everybody to be muted. Now, this meeting is being recorded, and hopefully within 24 hours, I will have it posted on the San Gorgonio Chapter YouTube channel. And I am right now going to be putting in the link to that YouTube channel so that you can see it. But you should have gotten a reminder message if you registered for this online. And the reminder message I sent out yesterday had the YouTube channel link in it. So save that and you'll be able to get to it. So if you can't listen to the whole talk, or you want to share this talk with someone else, you can send them the link to the YouTube channel and they can watch the talk from the comfort of their own home at whatever time they want to. So I think that pretty much covers, I do want to mention, we started the Trail Talk series when Sierra Club shut down all the outings. Well, we do have outings going on, so be sure to look in the outings and events section. The same section that lists this Trail Talk series has the hikes, the outings, and feel free to join in. We'd love to have more people hiking, and we're very happy to be back doing that again. So at this point, I think I want to introduce Carla Kellums. Carla is one of the committee members, the Trail Talk committee members, and Carla is going to introduce our speaker. So take it away, Carla.
Yes, welcome everybody. I'm happy to be able to introduce our speaker tonight. His name is Walter Roth. He is a retired elementary school teacher. He has been a Sierra Club member since 1970 and a San Gorgonio Wilderness Association volunteer ranger for 23 years, where he has done trail maintenance, trail patrols, and evening ranger talks at the Greyback Amphitheater in Barton Flats. So I want to welcome you, Walter, and go ahead and take it away.
Okay. And what I wanted to talk, now I have a question. Does everybody see all of our pictures on the side? Is it covering up the pictures? I guess we're, okay.
I believe you're good.
Okay, we're good. I'm going to concentrate pretty much entirely on the San Bernardino National Forest and the San Gorgonio Wilderness in particular, and that's because that's the area that I know best. I want to talk about how we got our trails and how we keep them open and safe. And one thing I learned, if I'm driving on the highway, I really don't think about who made it or who's making the maintenance on it. I just want to go from one place to another and don't think about it. And I think as we hike, we do something similar to that. We just take the trails for granted. But the best way to appreciate having a trail is to not have a trail. And this is a picture of me struggling up a very steep mountainside without a trail. This was a 2-day backpack I did in the spring in San Gorgonio. The first day, I did 6 miles in about 3 hours, leisurely actually. The second day was off trail on the steep, slippery slopes with a lot of these bushy trees and obstacles in our path. And it took me 3 hours to go 1 mile. That's the difference between having a trail and not having a trail. We used to have 3 permanent Forest Service employees who did trail work all year round. Then with budget cuts, they disappeared. So all the trail work in the San Gorgonio Wilderness and some of the surrounding areas is done by the San Gorgonio Wilderness Association. So we're all volunteers. If you're not familiar with the San Gorgonio Wilderness, this is how big it is, about 96,000 acres, about 90 miles of trails, with the elevations going all the way from 4,400 to 11,500. But we also do some work in the Cucamonga Wilderness, Ice House Canyon, Lido Creek, and Mount Baldy. This is a view of the San Gorgonio Wilderness from Morton Peak, Fire Lookout. This mountain right here is San Bernardino Peak. This mountain right here is San Gorgonio. And this is Mill Creek. This is Highway 38 that runs alongside it. And if you look at a map, this is the Mill Creek that we were just looking at. This is San Bernardino Peak we were looking at. San Gorgonio Peak over here, and Dobbs Cabin. And all this will kind of make a little more sense when I talk about how the very first trails were created. If you don't know what it looks like in the San Gorgonio Wilderness, here's a little brief travel log. We've got some waterfalls. We have some nice peaks and a lake that pops up every now and then when they have enough snow. We've got some nice forests. We have some high altitude forests, lodge pines and lodgepole pines. And close to the summit, we've got limber pines. The very first trails, the first guy to ever go into this wilderness that we know of was this Colonel Henry Washington, 1852. He climbed to the top of San Bernardino Peak, came down a little ways, and he built this tower, which was over 20 feet high. The reason he did it was because he was doing some surveying work. His job was to establish a baseline to make all the maps of Southern California. And he had other people down in the valley with telescopes, and they triangulated, and they could see his lantern on top. They tried at first with mirrors, but it was too hot. And the hot air rising was kind of wavy, and they couldn't get an accurate reading. So he built this tower with a lantern on it, and that worked just fine. The highway that we have in San Bernardino that goes out, I think, all the way like through Pomona, called Baseline, is the baseline. That is the line that was used to establish all the other surveying in Southern California. The first two guys to go up on top of San Gorgonio, we think, were these two characters. They were working for the U.S. Geological Survey, and they considered San Gorgonio and the whole ridge to be just one mountain. They called San Bernardino Mountain. But as far as we know, they were the first ones to actually climb it. As more and more people moved into Southern California and outdoor activities kind of became trendy and roads started being made up into the foothills of the mountains, people came up to do recreation. There were no trails that would at all, but people were still climbing Mount San Gorgonio just for the adventure of it. Then they started building tourist lodges and resorts. And this one, Forest Home, which is on Mill Creek, this guy, Thomas Akers, right here, decided that he wanted to have something to attract more customers. So he hired two guys. They were the Vivian brothers. And he said he wanted them to make a trail so people could get up to the summit of San Gorgonio more easily. Another person to make a trail up were the two Dobbs brothers, who were originally from Texas. And they built a trail about halfway to the summit, but they also took people to the summit. This is the cabin that the Dobbs brothers built. The reason they had a cabin back there was because their job was to build a flume that would carry water to generate electricity. And they were actually drilling a tunnel through the mountain to try to combine three creeks together to make enough water to generate electricity. Well, there were some legal problems with who had the water rights, and they ended up quitting. And instead, they started taking tourists up to the top of San Gorgonio. Here's another picture of Dobbs' cabin with some of the early tourists on their little donkeys. The cabin is no longer there, but there's at least one board that was part of the cabin is still there and visible. This is how the well-dressed hikers looked around 1900. And here they are approaching the summit of San Gorgonio using probably the Vivian Creek Trail. And that's what the summit looked like. Nothing much happened after that until the Great Depression. Then Franklin Roosevelt created the CCC, and their job was to take young men and put them to work, get them off the street, get them off from riding rails across the country and kind of being hobos, and try to put them to do something constructive. And one of their projects was to build trails in our local mountains. So these are the guys who built them, and they created almost all the trails in San Gorgonio Wilderness and vicinity. And also Mount Baldy. Here's a guy who's very proudly showing off all the muscles that he earned that summer. They started out building tents, little communities like this. And as the project continued, they built more permanent structures for them to live in. But they did more than just trails. They built fire lookouts, they built fire roads and fire breaks. And then in the 70s and 80s, we had Boy Scouts from Redlands and Long Beach, San Bernardino, who made several significant trail extensions and connections and some campground improvements as part of their scouting activities. But now, what do? Well, the San Gorgonio Wilderness is the most heavily visited wilderness in the country. Very concentrated, tens of thousands of people visit it every year, and we really want them to have these trails. If we didn't have the trails, first of all, we wouldn't have much access into the wilderness. It would be very difficult to get in. And secondly, people would make their own trails and they would be tramping everywhere. So the trails, although it doesn't seem very much like a wilderness in a way because you have a man-made trail in it, but it actually preserves the wilderness by concentrating people in one area instead of having them tramp everywhere. The problem with trails is that nature doesn't like them. It likes to erode them away. It likes to put obstacles, mostly trees. And we have a real problem with trees falling. And one reason is we do have, of course, droughts. We have bark beetles that kill trees and they fall on a trail. We have avalanches. In this avalanche, it took us like 2 months to get that cleared off the trail. We also have forest fires. Forest fires kill the trees, then the trees fall over for the next 20 years. This is an example of what San Gorgonio looked like in around 1967. And that's what it looks like now as a result of the fire. And all these trees are going to fall down at some point. Sometimes a lot of them fall at once. We call that being jackstrawed. And it does take some skill to figure out how to untangle them and get them off the trail in a way that's safe. This is some of our trail crew, not all of us. This is me right there. And on this particular day, when this picture was taken, we took out over 30 trees in one day. This is what our shirts look like. And the reason we have these shirts emblazoned with this Trails Volunteer is because when we first started trail work, a lot of the hikers that passed by thought we were convicts. They were doing some kind of community duty, community service. So we have these shirts to make people understand that we are actually volunteers. And we do get a lot of appreciation. Almost everybody who passes tells us that they appreciate the work that we're doing. Just to appreciate kind of what we're doing, a trail, just a single trail repair can take all day or even up to 3 days with crews of 5 to 35 people sometimes. Sometimes it involves backpacking and carrying gear that can be easily 30 pounds of gear in addition to our backpacks. So it can be very strenuous, and that's just getting there. The tools that we use are simple and old-fashioned, and there's a reason for that. We do not use chainsaws because they're not allowed. No motorized or wheeled anything is allowed in the wilderness. We couldn't use a wheelbarrow. We couldn't use an electric chainsaw or anything that's motorized in any way. So we use these kind of heavy-duty hand saws for branches and small trees, and we have the big saws that are 7 feet long. And the saws that we use are actually antiques. Most of them are 90 years old or older. We've bought them from different parts of the country. The reason that they're antiques is because they just don't make them like that anymore. These things are handcrafted when they were used commercially, and they were made with great care with very good steel, and there just is no comparison. We also have this kind of a combination tool. It's a heavy-duty rake on one side and a hoe on the other. It's called a McLeod. It's also used by firefighters. And we use these forestry shovels, which are much heavier duty, and they're sharp. We actually sharpen the edge just like a knife in order to cut through roots. We use this, it's called a Pulaski, named after a famous firefighter. And it has an axe on one side and a kind of horizontal axe on the other side. So you can cut both directions. Extremely useful tool. And of course, we have pruners to prune back the brush away from the trail. We still use just a standard axe. We use a sharp end for some things. We never use them to cut trees down. We always use a saw, but they do have their purpose. And then we use the hammer end frequently. We use wedges, like this plastic wedge, and we hammer them in the crack that we cut with the saw, because as you cut through a tree, it wants to, the weight of the tree wants to collapse on the saw and hold it tight, like in a vise. Makes so much friction, you cannot move the saw. So we have to hammer wedges in to keep it away from the saw so that we can move it freely back and forth. We also use these rock bars. They can weigh about 20 pounds a piece, and they're used for sometimes moving logs, sometimes prying rocks, sometimes for digging holes. We also sometimes use a hand winch we call a come-along for pulling things that we don't want to get too close to. This is a sort of a typical thing that we find all the time. Tree falls across a trail and it creates an obstacle that is very difficult for people to get around. And we try to get these as quickly as possible so people can have access. But also when an obstacle is like this, people make their own trail, additional trails around them, and that kind of scars up the terrain, which we don't like to see either. When we come across a tree like this, we don't just start sawing away at it. Each crew has a trail boss, which is the most experienced and most highly trained person in the group, typically. And they discuss the plan with the group. And we spend maybe 15 minutes or so looking for hazards and making a plan as to how to remove the tree. So we don't just do it willy-nilly. We come into a situation like this, you can see it's a large tree. It has a lot of branches that are sticking out, and this is a trail down here. That's quite an obstacle. And it's high. That means it's got a lot of energy in it. So if it falls, it can be extremely dangerous. So that requires a lot of planning to get something like that removed. And it can take all day to get a tree like that off. We've got lots of ways to move trees. The first thing we always try is to just shove it off. Now this tree was rotten, you can see, so we didn't have to be cut. And the crew just gets there and rolls it off. Sometimes we have to put something underneath the tree to get it off because there's like a lip on the trail. And we'll use branches, other small trees that we can find to make kind of a ramp to get it off. Sometimes we'll use bark and stick it underneath the tree, and actually it'll make it slippery, and we can turn the tree around and maneuver it on the bark slabs that we find. So here we are, and it can take a lot of energy to move it along like that, and all the limbs on the side have to be trimmed off before it can be rolled. And you'll notice that this tree is rotten on the inside. when I first started trail crew, I thought, oh, a rotten tree should be easier to cut because it's soft and it's not so hard. Turns out it's the exact opposite. We actually tap the tree with the axe before we start and listen to it and feel it to see if it's rotten. And we try to cut where it isn't rotten, if at all possible, because a rotten tree is like cutting through cork. It's soft, and instead of cutting, it just sort of grabs on the tree. The tree just sort of grabs onto the saw and makes so much friction, they're very difficult to cut. Sometimes we can't roll them with our hands. We're not strong enough, so we'll lay down in the trail and use our legs, which are much stronger. This is the thing that I hate the most, and it's a hanging tree. It has a huge amount of energy in it, and they're very unpredictable. These branches can make the tree fall in a way that you don't expect. The tree can start falling on them, and then the branches will deflect it, and it can fall just about any place. So if at all possible, we'll throw a line around it and use the hand winch to come along and try to pull it off the branches from a safe distance. I did have an experience once. I learned a lesson from this. We had a tree a little bit smaller than this. It was hung up in some very small little branches, not strong branches, but just little branches. And it was hanging over the trail, very dangerous. So I suggested that we just grab it by the trunk. It was broken off, so it wasn't attached. And just pick it up and pull it backwards until it slid off the branches, and it would fall down and we'd just throw it off. But what happened was completely unexpected. And that's that as we pulled it off the branches, there was a weak spot in the tree and it broke. So about the top 6 feet of the tree came off, and it was kind of the weight of the tree flipped it straight at us, coming end over end right at us, and it missed us by maybe 6 or 8 feet. And if it had hit us, it would have probably killed us. So I learned from that lesson, pull it with using a rope, put a line around the base of it and pull it from about 10, 15 feet back. We do cut trees, but it's only as a last resort because it's so energy and time consuming, and it just takes so much energy. Before they let us use the saws, they actually have to go through a course, 2 full days of formal training, 1 day in the classroom, and another day out on the trail, actually removing trees and being evaluated with a guy with a clipboard on every single thing that we do. And we've got 3 different levels of training, A, B, and C, depending on how sophisticated your skills are. So using the saws and cutting the trees, they take very seriously. Here's our crew cutting a tree to get it off the trail. And you can see all these branches had to be trimmed off first, a lot of work. And you'll notice that right around here, there's a line, because when you cut the tree, it could fall. And obviously, it's going to fall downhill. And this person here, as they get closer and closer to the bottom, the trail boss will make sure that this individual leaves and gets on the uphill side. But this is to steady it so it doesn't come unexpectedly. And you see how these branches have been laid down right on here. That is going to make a ramp, so to make sure that the tree actually exits the trail and goes off. Sometimes when we are cutting it with one person, we have to take the handles off so that we can pull the saw through, because the top of it has the wedges in it. So there's a lot of strategy involved. Now looking at this, we're almost through the whole tree cutting. A couple of things I would like to point out to you. One is, you notice how the bark has been removed here? That's one of the first things that we do, is we use the Pulaski to cut the bark away. The bark usually has a lot of dirt in it, which we don't want to get in the saw any more than we have to. It also allows us to see what the quality of the wood. And as it's cut through, you can see there's a wedge hammered in there. And then this has been slammed into the tree across the cut. And the reason is because as we cut farther and farther down, the tree, gravity wants to pull the tree in different directions and it will start to twist. And if that happens, it'll bind against the saw and then the saw can't be moved. So the saw is stuck, which is a major problem. So this is hammered in there to steady it so that it doesn't twist. If you want to look at this is the teeth on our saw, they're pretty aggressive. You notice that the teeth cut both directions because we pull from both directions. And these teeth you can see are completely different in their shape. And that's because they're not cutting teeth. These cut, and these are scraper teeth. So their job is just to scrape the sawdust out as you cut, because if the, what we call the kerf, which is the cut that you're cutting, gets filled with sawdust, then it can jam up and make it impossible to cut. Also, as we cut lower and lower, we put bark underneath so that the saw doesn't ever touch the ground. And there we are after working for hours to cut 2 cuts to get that chunk out. And so when you hike along the trail and you see these pieces that are over like that, it's hard to appreciate that it took hours and hours to get that cut. Our crew works in winter as long as the snow isn't too deep. We continue to cut and remove trees all winter. But we don't just remove trees. That's the main thing we do, but we don't just remove trees. We also rebuild trails that have been obstructed or destroyed in one way or another. This actually is part of the Pacific Crest Trail, which we rebuilt to reroute it. The trail originally was going along Mission Creek, and the trail boss said, we want the trail to stay out of the creek to protect it from being eroded, because this was after the lake fire. The trail was completely obliterated. So we made a whole new trail with switchbacks and everything to reroute it. Also, when we do work, it tends to be hard on the trail itself, leaves a lot of debris. So we like to clean it up, get the little sticks and so forth off of it. Sometimes we need to reinforce the trail by building little walls. I'm sure you've seen those. And then this is how we carry rocks. We go to where the rocks are, carry them in the sling, and then we use them to build these reinforcements that will support trails in places where they like to slough off. So we've got some retaining walls. Some of them have been completely rebuilt that have been damaged or destroyed. When people cut switchbacks, of course, I think everybody knows about how that can make a shortcut for water, which can wash a trail out. And it's hard to appreciate how much work it takes to put all this dirt and rock back uphill and collect it and make the trail walkable again. Sometimes you'll see, maybe it's a little hard to see on this. If you look a little closer, you can see this wire mesh. You'll see that on some trails that have a tendency to slough off a lot. We call it a gabion, which I guess is an Italian word for cage, and it is just basically a cage. We carry them up, fold it up, and then we unfold them. We have to dig out the area where the the trail has sloughed off and make this thing fit. And then we fill it full of rocks and gravel. And they work really, really well. They're very resistant to erosion. But we also replace signs. Signs get destroyed either by fires or just old age from being out for a long time. They get weathered and fall apart. And sometimes people just destroy them for some reason. So we put new signs up. Now this is on Poop Out Hill. This is unusual because it has dirt. Usually when we dig to put a sign in, we have to really excavate it using a rock bar because there's really almost no dirt. It is rocks. So they have to be dug out. It's more like mining than digging. But this one was an easy job. And we also, as a trail crew, put up kiosks. This is at the trailhead at Mollmeyer. And we built all this from scratch in the shop. And we dug all these holes and put it all up. And that's me. I'm trying to smile, but I'm too tired to smile. But if you're interested in doing trail work, of course, we'd love to have you. It's a very satisfying thing. You get a lot of appreciation and you learn a lot. And you certainly get some exercise, I can say that for sure.
Oh, thank you. That was really, really interesting. Great photos.
Yeah, thank you, Walter. There was one question that came to mind, and I didn't hear you answer it, and I know there's a very good answer for it. But people are probably wondering, you're talking about using all these hand tools. People are wondering, why don't you use power tools?
Right. It's each wilderness has a sort of a you might say like a constitution. They have rules that they're governed by. And some of them I think are universal with all wildernesses, and some of them are particular to a given wilderness. And our rules are that we have no power anything or wield anything. So that's why we also use nothing but hand tools.
And another question was, is there a website for the San Gorgonio association that you're involved with that does all this trail maintenance? And if so, do you go through the website to sign up if somebody's interested in becoming or doing what you do?
Yes, SGWA. You can just Google San Gorgonio Wilderness Association, and it'll come up, and they'll tell you it's self-explanatory. It has lots of information. It even has current trail information. It has maps. It has information about volunteering. If you want to volunteer, and there's a lot of things to do besides trail maintenance. Some people like to just work behind a counter and work with the public. Some people love to hike on the trails and do trail patrols. And some people like to do talking nature talks, which is another thing that I've started to do the last 10 years or so. And you have to go through an orientation in the spring. I think it's in April. I never can remember exactly. They always tell me. But you go through the orientation, and they tell you how to do everything that you might be interested in. And you will be assigned a mentor, somebody who has experience, and they'll guide you through the first phases of your volunteer work. And that's pretty much all there is to it.
Wow, thank you. I just want to echo the sentiment that's been coming in through the chat. I really appreciate all the work that you and the volunteers do to keep our trails safe and clear. There was another question in the chat in regards to how do you prioritize trails? Do you focus more like trails to work on or the maintenance that you're doing? Is it more for trails that are high use You focus on those ones more, or is it more of a situational thing where if the trail is blocked or it's unsafe, you focus on that?
It's a combination of those two things. There are some things that you can just step over and those become a lower priority, but also trails that are kind of remote and very few people use, they're a low priority. And trails that are really, frankly, if they're just difficult to get to, if it takes an overnight or longer to get a crew up and do it, then that's also a little more difficult to get people to do that. We did do one on San Gorgonio trail up to the summit, where a very large tree, a triple trunk tree, had fallen across the trail and also put a giant rock about the size of a small refrigerator on the trail. And it took 3 days to get that tree off and to get that rock off and to rebuild the trail. So fortunately at that one, we had equestrian support. So we had people bring up water for us, and they brought our tools up for us on horseback. So that helped out. We had to carry them out, but at least they carried them in for us.
Okay, yeah. Another question, real important one, is if we do have quite a few hikers listening in on this trail talk, how would they go and report any obstacles or safety situations with trails out in the San Gorgonio Wilderness?
You know, that's a good question. If there's if there's a ranger, a volunteer ranger, you can report it. Online, I'm not 100% sure where to report that. You could probably call Mill Creek Ranger Station, and they would relay that information to our coordinator, and they'll put it on the schedule. Usually it's the volunteer trail patrols that notice the obstacles, and then we report it directly. And then and we try to take a picture of it and get its location on a GPS and send that to our coordinator. And that way they have an idea of what kind of tools to bring, how many people it'll take. And we also give an estimate of how big the tree is. If it's a tree, it makes a difference if it's 10 inches or if it's 36 inches. So, and sometimes a picture doesn't quite do it justice. So we try to supply that information. And if you want to report it, then I would suggest that you also take a picture of it, give its location, what trail it's on, and some kind of a description about how big it is. That would be helpful.
Thank you.
Walter, I've got a comment. Boy, I was sure thinking about you and the association this past weekend. I was up in the Yosemite area, and I took a hike near Bass Lake, which is east of Oakhurst. And it was a lovely hike, but the sign had totally disintegrated. It was a Forest Service sign. Nobody repaired it. I really appreciate how well maintained our trails are in our area and the work that you do, because I was on a trail that was not lovingly maintained, and it was a beautiful area. It was a beautiful trail, but boy, I sure appreciate what you do, and I wish there had been a group of people up in that Bass Lake area to take care of this trail the way you guys take care of our area trails. So well, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
We have another question too. In that example you showed of rerouting the PCT, who chose and mapped the new route, and how long to get that planned and approved?
Well, the person that does it actually is a Forest Service employee. She's stationed in Big Bear, and she is our boss. And it was her plan to reroute the trail, and she made the route. However, if it's a small rerouting, that is something that we do ourselves. We just take the initiative to do that. Sometimes an obstacle is so big, there's no safe way to remove it, and we'll reroute the trail to just avoid it. Sometimes there's erosion is so persistent that we just make a new trail next to the old trail, which used to have, that sometimes the trails just become creeks, and they get so deep and eroded and full of rocks and ruts that we just say, okay, that is going to be a drain. And now we'll make a new trail parallel to it, maybe a little above it, and it won't be so exposed to erosion. But we also do dips and various kinds of contours to the trails to keep them from eroding. And a lot of them have been very effective. I've seen them over the years. I go past them, I say, oh, I remember when we did this one. I remember when we did that one. And a lot of them have held up. Some of them haven't. Some of them are just completely obliterated. Like the South Fork Trail, I worked the whole day on putting in all kinds of erosion controls, and we had a huge flood that just took the whole trail out. So now we've rerouted the trail. If you've ever gone from South Fork from the parking lot, there's a new trail which just goes straight up. It's not the most beautifully engineered trail, but it does get you up onto the trail without having to go through the other place. It's just gone.
So I put in the website in the chat section. It is, as Walt said, sgwa.org.
Right. And if you get a username and you can contribute your trail information onto the bulletin board, but that's for hikers to check, and they can check and see if there's, like water reported or trail conditions. But I wouldn't guarantee that information is going to get to the people who coordinate the trail crews. So that is probably something you might need to. Yeah, I've never looked into it because I've always had my own direct line to the trail coordinators. So that's a good question. I think if you call up, they would get it to our trail coordinator.
Here's a new one. Are there plans to work on the Mount Baldy Trail above the Sierra Hut and above pretty bad erosion in lots of places?
I'm afraid I have no idea.
Yeah.
We did some work on the trail up to the ski hut and a little bit beyond. We put some signs in because people were getting lost. They were coming down from the ski hut and they would go straight down and miss the turn and end up being rim-rocked on top of San Antonio Falls and have to call on their cell phones and get rescued. And so we put a sign up in the middle of the trail, the wrong trail, to warn people and tell them, which way to go.
Yeah, and a lot of signs up higher, closer to the peak, after you get past the Baldy Bowl, that was just honeycombed with trails, and people get lost up there and sometimes end up going all the way down to Baldy Village.
Yes. Yeah, no, I don't know if we have any plans to do anything over. I don't do as much trail crew work as I used to. I did it very, very intensively for 8 years. And then with a couple of injuries, joint injuries, I haven't been as active with the trail crew as I was before. So I'm not as well connected.
Well, if there are no other questions, let's see, here's another one. Are there other volunteer trail crews in this region, or is it just you guys?
That's a good question. San Jacinto has a very small trail crew. The last time I talked to them, there were 2 guys that were doing the trail crew.
Wow.
In Mount Baldy, there's also a very small group, like 6 guys. Of course, it fluctuates, but the last time I worked with them, only 1 guy showed up. And then our crew, which was about 8 guys. And so we've helped them out a few times. We've worked in Lytle Creek, putting gabions in, and we've worked in up by Mount Baldy. And we've worked in Ice House Canyon several times.
Yeah, we really appreciate that, because the Cucamonga Wilderness is a stepchild. It's part in Angeles National Forest and part in San Bernardino National Forest, so nobody takes total ownership as far as the Forest Service is concerned.
Yeah, well, we definitely work in Lytle Creek because it is part of the San Bernardino National Forest.
Right.
But the wilderness right now, because of the fires and the number of trees, I think the number I heard last year was we took out over 300 trees last year.
Wow.
Off trails. So it's taking up a lot of our time, just getting trees off.
Well, thank you for all the work you're doing, Walt, you and the Wilderness Association. It's greatly appreciated. And thanks for a wonderful program. Lots of positive comments in the chat section.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
And by the way, next month's Trail Talk is also being done by Walt. Do you want to say a little bit about it?
Sure. It's going to be about the human impact on the San Bernardino mountains, the San Bernardino National Forest, not just the wilderness, but the surrounding area, and some of the origins of some of the names of the places, the various, it's going to take the whole history all the way from Native Americans all the way up to the present time. Spend a little bit of time on each period, what they contributed, what they did, how they tried to exploit the wilderness, how we got to where we are.
Sounds great.
Thank you, Walter. That was very informative.
Thanks.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
If anybody else wants to unmute themselves and say anything, they're welcome. I mean, at this point, the talk is over. Lots of comments in the chat section thanking you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, I guess that pretty much concludes it, unless there are any other comments or questions from people. Thank you all for showing up to listen to Trail Talk, and I will get this thing posted as quickly as possible on the YouTube channel.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.